Hello, Humanities 1302, and welcome to another lecture here in class. And today, the topic that we're going to be covering is going to be that of arts and music in the Napoleonic era. And we're going to be talking about really, I should say, not just the era of Napoleon, but also the French Revolution, including that within this lecture. And why we're going to be focusing on this topic is because the art and music that will be produced during this period are going to greatly impact the larger population of France and then i.e. the Army of France that we had talked about earlier this week. But anyways, we're going to be examining the arts and the music that were characteristic of this period, see how the revolution impacts artwork during this period, and see what works of art they were inspired from. But also, what we're going to be looking at as we take a look through, especially the images, and to a lesser extent the music, as we do discuss the arts, we're going to be talking about how they will be used as propaganda, especially within Napoleon's period that he's in power, because it'll be a very powerful weapon in trying to glorify him as well as propel his image. And we'll see that he would create a very elaborate propaganda machine, mostly through artwork. Now, to begin this lecture, I do want to talk about what propaganda really is. And when we think of propaganda, oftentimes we think of images that are produced during World War II, like Rosie the Riveter, or this propaganda piece that we see over here that really demonizes the enemy. And these will become characteristic of modern propaganda, and we'll talk a lot about them during especially World War One and World War II. However, propaganda is nothing new to our modern era. Now, propaganda, what it's essentially trying to do is manipulate emotions to either demonize the enemy or to promote a great amount of patriotism. And you see this characteristic throughout history for various causes. I mean, the earliest pieces of propaganda that I can think of that come to mind are going to be some of the works that are published by Julius Caesar back during the Roman Republic and the later Roman Empire ages. So propaganda has been around throughout much of human history. And so this is really where we're going to first kind of come into contact with major forms of propaganda that are going to be able to be visible to the bulk of a particular population. However, they're going to look a little bit different than what we recognize with modern day propaganda. So I just wanted to kind of get that a little bit out of the way, but we'll talk more about modern propaganda in the future. Now, one of the major propagandists, if you will, that's going to produce a large amount of artwork during this period for Napoleon, as well as for the revolutionary cause before that, will be the guy that you see up here on the screen, that of Jacques Louis David, who will be really the artist of the French Revolution, and then later of Napoleon's. Excuse me, as I kind of drop my mic. But anyways, be the artist of Napoleon's empire. He'll actually become the first painter of the French Empire. Now, in regards to the styles that we're going to see David, as well as many of the pieces of art that will be produced during this period, they're going to be in what's called a neoclassical style. Essentially, what you'll see David, as well as his students do during this period, is they're going to refer back to classical pieces of artwork as well as Renaissance artwork, in which they believe that really this is the best form of art that we'd seen practiced up to this point, and they're going to look to perfect it. And David is probably the best of the neoclassical artists of this period. Now, I do have a excerpt which is also included in the lecture slides that are posted on D2L. But anyways, I wanted to go through and kind of read what David thinks of the art should be during this period, and what he should be believes should be characteristic of neoclassical artwork. So this excerpt reads, David would write, "The art should help to spread the progress of human spirit and to propagate and transmit to posterity the striking examples of the efforts of a tremendous people who, guided by reason and philosophy, are bringing back to earth the reign of liberty, equality, and law. The arts must therefore contribute forcefully to the education of the public. The arts are the imitation of nature in her most beautiful and perfect form. Those marks of heroism and civic virtue offered the eyes of the people will electrify and soul and plant the seeds of glory and devotion to the fatherland." Now, a couple of things off that excerpt I just read, we can see, really, especially in the beginning portions of that excerpt, how much emphasis he puts on really the principles of the French Revolution on liberty, equality, and law. And really, he also points out later on that the art should imitate nature in her most beautiful and perfect form. Now, I want to kind of relate two things, and I'll come back to what I just said a moment ago in regards to the ideas of the revolution. But he's looking back to classical art because you see that there's a major focus on trying to create a sense of realism, to have the correct geometrical proportions, to really capture an image in the age before photography through a painting. To capture that moment in time. And he's arguing this same thing here, but also how it relates to the ideals of the revolution. Is he wants to capture those natural laws that apply to man. He wants to capture those natural rights that we had talked about before. And so he's wanting to capture nature in its most beautiful and perfect form in several ways, whether it be through the revolution or whether it be through the realism that we see in the world. Now, I do want to point out he also talks about how art would be influential in educating the public. And during this period, like images today, artwork very much so can influence the thoughts and the ideas of the public. And so, no surprise, many of his paintings trying to educate the public are going to be works of propaganda for the respective cause that he'll be employed by, whether it be the Jacobins during the Revolution or later Napoleon during his reign. And then just to kind of clear up just what he means by fatherland, he's referring to France when he says that. But anyways, going into David's paintings, let me go ahead and move on to the next one. We're going to start with his work that he begins to produce actually before the French Revolution. Now, the first image that you see here on the screen is David's Oath of Horatii. Now, the Oath of Horatii, it's going to be commissioned by King Louis the 16th. It's going to be provided with royal patronage. And it was meant to promote some of those ideas that we had seen David mention within that excerpt that he believes was vital to many of his paintings, the ideas of civic and virtue. And in this image, what he's drawing on is a famed story from the days of the Roman Republic, in which you see a Roman household go off to war against a neighboring household. And the story was very familiar to the people of France at this time. I actually believe I can't remember the name of the oh, who is it? The name of the guy that had done a series of plays over this various episode within Paris. But anyways, it was a well-known subject to the French people, and it demonstrates the civic duty that the French people, or I should say, that these Romans had to the city of Rome, even though that there's somewhat divided loyalties in this background that we see over here. Women or the women that are being depicted. One of them is a is a wife to one of the soldiers, and she was actually from the opposing household that they were about to go out to meet. And likewise, there's also depicted here the sisters or sister of these brothers, who very much so is dreading their brothers going out into combat to where they could potentially be killed. And so it demonstrates to us duty on several stages, both with the men as well as the women. And it also promotes kind of the gender roles that was expected during the period and views at this time. But anyways, this was commissioned by King Louis the 16th. It became a very popular image. It would be displayed on an exhibition in 1785 in Paris and would be relatively well received. However, even though it was commissioned through royal patronage, it actually is going to inspire a great amount of nationalism within the Frenchmen, which is part of what was the really the objective of this piece, but not in the way that King Louis would have hoped. More so, it's going to promote that nationalism, especially in the early days of the Revolution, because with the ideals of liberty, equality, virtue, all these things being promoted during that opening phase of the revolution, it's also going to promote a lot of nationalism, to promote the French cause, to support those ideas. And eventually, many Frenchmen are going to see this as kind of a rallying call for building nationalism, especially when facing armies that are looking to destroy the French cause. But anyways, that's really the only piece of artwork I wanted to talk about before the Revolutionary period. Now let's look at David's paintings during the Revolutionary period, and then eventually leading up to the age of Napoleon. Now, the first image, and perhaps one of his more well-known images, is going to be that of the death of Marat. Now, in The Death of Marat, he's using the same artistic style with neoclassicalism. And I do want to point out, while we do see him produce neoclassical works, which, if you can look, are very detailed in their subject matter, this is also going to become the de facto style of the French Revolution. And he believes, as we've seen through that excerpt, that it should promote those same ideals. But anyways, in the death of Marat, this is going to actually capture a historical event that we see happening during the case of during the middle of the French Revolution, and it'll be that of the death of the writer of Jean-Paul Marat. Now, Marat was a writer really for the Jacobin faction during the early days of the Revolution, and many of his writings that were published in his newspaper are going to lead to the events that we had seen in the Reign of Terror. However, eventually he's going to be assassinated while he was soaking in a bath. And I want to point out, Marat, he had a skin condition to where he had to remain in a bathtub for much of the hours of the day. But anyways, he would be assassinated, stabbed several times, and eventually die. And with it, his pen that had promoted much of what calling for the events of the Reign of Terror, it will come to an end. However, for the Jacobins, they're going to hail him as a martyr. Now, we had talked about the various cults that emerged during the French Revolution. And as a part of some of those cults, you'll see that Marat would be depicted as almost kind of like a godlike figure. And we see this similarly produced in David's Death of Marat. Now, first, in regards to David, I just wanted to mention, and I think I had mentioned it earlier, he would ally himself with the Jacobin faction. He was very much a close friend with Marat, with as well as some of the other leading Jacobins. But anyways, in this image, he really portrays him in a Christ-like stance, kind of elevating him to that position, like what I said within the various cults of this period, that he would be seen as a godlike figure. Now, the pose that he is in, that we see up here on the screen, is very similar to the poses that we see in Michelangelo's images in St. Peter's in Rome, and how he has Christ after he has been removed from the cross as he's getting ready to be put into the tomb. And so there's really this comparison, this drawing on these more classical ideals that we'd seen in the Renaissance paintings that David's also going to draw on. However, he's going to elevate a contemporary figure to that status. And this is something that we'll see become characteristic of many paintings during this period. And we'll see it especially with Napoleon a little bit later on, so do keep that in mind. But anyways, this image would have been a piece of propaganda for the Jacobin faction, once again depicting Marat in a Christ-like pose as a martyr for the revolution. But anyways, with the death of Marat, that's really the main, or the what's the word I'm looking for? This is really the biggest image that we'll see David produce during the course of the revolution. He'll produce some other works, and actually, going back to when we talked about the French Revolution, I had a picture of Marie Antoinette. He'll actually pin the last known image of Marie Antoinette before her execution. But anyways, fast forwarding with events, David wouldn't enjoy his status as a really highly regarded painter very long during the Revolution, because with the overthrow of the Jacobin faction in 1794, David would be arrested. Like many Jacobins, there would be a great amount of suspicion towards him, and luckily for him, he'd be released the following year, and he wouldn't actually be sent to the guillotine. However, he's going to have to try to repair much of his painting career, especially since the Jacobins had fallen out of sway within France. However, it wouldn't be long before he finds a powerful ally who was also a former supporter of the Jacobin faction, with Napoleon. And he would begin to produce a large number of work for Napoleon, both before he becomes the Emperor of France, as well as once he does become the Emperor of France. And each one of these pieces are going to be major pieces of artwork that are going to promote propaganda to try to glorify Napoleon, his reign, and his image during this period. And the first that we come on across is that of Napoleon crossing the Alps. Now, historically, something like this probably wasn't happened. You wouldn't have seen Napoleon pose in such a fashion or rear his horse as we see in this image. However, it's supposed to present this very powerful, this very significant, viewpoint of Napoleon leading his troops across the Alps to victory in northern Italy. And as a result, this image would have been reproduced and it would have been shown in exhibition halls all across France. And it very much puts Napoleon into a very powerful, I don't want to say a godlike stance quite yet, but into a very powerful, definitely ruling class type stance. And it would be widely accepted and circulated during the course of this period. Now, with this image, the coronation of Napoleon, as well as Napoleon crossing the Alps, we need to understand that while they are depicting historical events, they're not necessarily depicting them exactly how they happened. Now, I wish I would have attached this to this set of slides that I have with all these paintings, but odds are Napoleon did not stage himself in such a pose like we had seen there while out on campaign. He would have been in a much more humble kind of position during that period, but nonetheless, it's something we probably wouldn't see. Same thing could be said here in regards to this image of the coronation of Napoleon as well as his wife Josephine, whenever after Napoleon has declared himself emperor. Now, there are a couple of things that you could take away from this image. One, Napoleon's mother, who's represented in this image, I believe this is her depicted right here. She actually never attended this event. She refused to attend it. So there's where we start to see some of the kind of Napoleon wanting to put into this image, really pushing David to put his mother into this image, trying to kind of change the historical event itself as it happened. Also, in regards to the Pope, you kind of see him over here giving the blessing to Napoleon as he's doing that. The Pope was at this episode. However, he was really just there as a figurehead. He didn't really do anything significant in regards to the coronation. And so that's extending the truth a little bit as well. And the purpose for this was to glorify Napoleon's image, to kind of unite his household and to get to, especially for the French people, to show that he has the acceptance of the Pope in this instance, that he is divinely ordained in order to gain popular support. And this was a very powerful piece of propaganda during this period. But it is important for us to recognize that a lot of these images aren't exactly portraying actual historical events. And I should say it's not just characteristic of these images produced during the Napoleonic era, but rather you see this throughout many art pieces of artwork. And I even point out many of these within my U.S. history classes, especially when looking at images like Washington crossing the Delaware and so forth. But anyways, the next image that I want to turn our attention to actually is going to be a image produced by one of David's students for Napoleon, which would serve in a very similar fashion to be a piece of propaganda. Now I'm going to butcher his name, but it's Antoine One Gros, I believe is how you pronounce it. But anyways, it'll be his work of Napoleon visiting the plague-stricken in Jaffa. Now, this image is recapturing the events of Napoleon and his campaign out in the Levant during the late 1790s when he actually had led his expedition out into Egypt. But anyways, Napoleon here, he would eventually arrive in the town and occupy the town of Jaffa. And while there, his troops would suffer, as well as some of the population, from effects of the bubonic plague. Now, in this image, Napoleon is the main subject that we see here in the center. But once again, we see that in one of these images, the main subject, Napoleon, is being put into a Christ-like pose. Now we can see all the suffering all around Napoleon and the various conditions. But anyways, here what we see is Napoleon is touching one of his soldiers, almost as he has these like feeling or healing kind of powers on which he could heal his troops. And this propels his image once again as a kind of Christ-like figure. And this is a very powerful piece, especially for the French people to relate to, viewing him in a very high status and in very high esteem, almost as a godlike figure once again. However, within images like this, there are other grim messages, especially that we see here in the background. And the reason I want to point out these grim messages that we see here with the suffering from the plague and so forth is because a lot of these kind of anti-classical, if you will, imagery that promote these grim ideas, they're going to become characteristic of an artistic style that will come out of the revolution that we'll talk more about later on with romanticism. But anyways, that's more of a topic for the next lecture. But anyways, we've talked a lot about the arts, and there's plenty of other pieces of artwork that we could also discuss, but I want to go ahead and turn our attention to music because music very much is going to be inspired, dedicated to Napoleon, and will also be very influential in the armies of Napoleon. Now, first, I want to turn our attention to the guy we see here on the screen, which maybe you're probably familiar with him, but if you're not familiar with the image, you'll definitely be familiar with his name. This guy is Ludwig von Beethoven. Now, Beethoven, in The Rise of Napoleon, he actually is producing much of his work around the same time of the Revolution as well as the Rise of Napoleon. He was an enlightened thinker. He supported the ideals of the revolution, and he would early on support the rise of Napoleon, who he believed were extending and continuing the ideals of the revolution when he was serving as the first consul. And by the early 1800s, you'll see that Beethoven would write his Symphony Number 3, Eroica, and with this symphony, he would dedicate it personally to Napoleon. It'll actually be known in the future as Bonaparte amongst the inner circle of Beethoven. And he was dedicating it to Napoleon because, once again, he believed that Napoleon was promoting the ideals of the revolution and so forth. Now, eventually, the following year after he dedicates it to Napoleon, which will be in 1803 when he dedicates it, but the following year in 1804, that's when Napoleon will declare himself emperor. Beethoven's kind of withdraw this dedication, dedicate it to others, but nonetheless, it will continue to be remembered as Bonaparte amongst many of Beethoven's inner circles. But we see Napoleon as having a tremendous impact on music as well. Now, I also want to turn to French music during this period that's being produced. And as mentioned before, it's going to be impacted by the events of this period. And the first real piece of artwork that I want to turn our attention to, or I should say music that I want to turn our attention to in regards to France, is the French national anthem. Now, the French national anthem that we see today does come from this period, and I'm going to completely butcher the name, so I apologize, but La Marseillaise, that will be the French national anthem produced during this period. And if you listen to the national or to the French national anthem, and I'll put a video of it on D2L just so that way you could see the lyrics of what it is. It's recounting and commemorating the actions of the Parisians during the early days of the French Revolution. It would actually this song would be created in 1792 and eventually would be adopted as the national anthem of the Republic by 1795, and it would continue to be played well into the reign of Napoleon, and as mentioned before, continues to remain as the French national anthem of this day. And it talks about things like purifying the fields with blood of these kind of like, I guess you could say what they would be referring to, the monarchs of the old order, and trying to make a more, at least in their eyes, perfect society, free for liberty and so forth, as you'll see with the lyrics. Now, also in regards to music, since our topic really this week has been focusing on the Napoleonic armies, music plays a very significant role in the Napoleonic armies. And we're only being focusing on the French army, but I do encourage y'all in your own time, if you would, to look up the music of other armies. Now, the French army, as most armies, I should say really all European armies of this period, had their own bands that would accompany them while on campaigns, playing a variety of marching songs to keep the esprit de corps high amongst troops, to keep them, I guess you could say, distracted, especially during their off time, really to brighten the mood, if you will. Now, there are a number of songs that these soldiers would play, but the most famous of which, or most popular of which, amongst these soldiers would include Chanson de Léon, which is really a song about a onion out on campaign. And according to legend, Napoleon, he would state while watching many of his soldiers eat onions, he would state that there's nothing better than an onion for marching on the road to glory. And so this would be inspired to create this song, and it would be very popular amongst the troops to sing while on campaign. I also want to point out while there will be other marching songs, many soldiers, as a part of their camp life, would also have their own instruments, and they would play some of these songs. They would play, say, the national anthem as well, and so forth. And it would really help kind of promote, as I mentioned before, that esprit de corps. But anyways, for us, that's pretty much all that I wanted to cover in this particular video. I'm going to go ahead and end it on this note. But before I end, just kind of as a friendly reminder, if you do have any questions, always feel free to reach out. Make sure that you are reviewing all materials from this week. Make sure that you watch both lecture videos and you get all assignments turned in on time. But anyways, that's pretty much all I got for y'all. Everybody go out, be safe, and I'll see everybody in the next video.